Transcript extract. Conclave archival log number 881 Omega vessel. Ethelgard, high-tier exploration class. Recording officer. Chief Science Officer Vaelen, Fringeline Cartography Division. Location. Boundary edge of Sector 12. Designation. The Dead Zone. The external hull monitors of the Ethelgard registered absolutely nothing. To a starship traveling at standard sublight survey velocities, the border of Sector 12 did not present an asteroid belt, a nebular cloud, or a high-density radiation barrier. It was simply an abrupt, geometrically perfect termination of starlight. The dense star clusters of the Sagittarius arm, usually a brilliant tapestry of violet and gold plasma, cut off along a razor-thin vector, leaving nothing ahead but a 3,000 light-year void of pure, unyielding ink. For 10,000 solar cycles, the Pinnacle Council had left this sector dark. The official stellar charts held a single, absolute bureaucratic directive regarding the region. Interdicted. Do not chart. Do not enter. Do not broadcast. The automated beacons have been tracking us for 3 light weeks, Chief, reported Senior Navigator Lyra, her slender, iridescent antenna twitching with a nervous rhythm against her console. They aren't using standard subspace frequencies. They are utilizing localized, microgravitational pulses. They are blinking at us, sir, like a mechanical eye counting our engines. Vaelen adjusted his ocular lenses, leaning over the primary tactical display. The Ethelgard was a marvel of conclave engineering, built with high-sensitivity quantum sensors designed to map the structural composition of a planet from across a solar system. Yet, as they hovered at the very lip of the interdicted zone, those sensors were behaving erratically, not because of interference but because they were trying to calculate a massive, low-frequency gravitational distortion drifting directly in their flight path. "Bring us to 3,000 kilometers," Vaelen commanded, his voice a low, raspy click. "Keep the deflector matrices at a passive baseline. We are here to observe, not to provoke." As the exploration vessel crossed the invisible threshold into Sector 12, the ship's primary computational core suffered a localized systemic freeze. The elegant, crystalline user interfaces on the bridge suddenly vanished, replaced by columns of heavy, blocky crimson text that overrode the vessel's deep-layer operating system. The engines did not flame out. They were systematically decoupled from the main fusion matrix by an external, unhackable administrative command. The Ethelgard came to a dead, unmoving halt in the vacuum. Through the forward view screen, the starlight caught the silhouette of the object generating the gravitational pulse. It was not a derelict station or a natural moonlet. It was a brutalist, multifaceted monolith of scarred, hyperdense iron and tungsten carbide, measuring nearly 40 kilometers from apex to base. It carried no decorative hull panels, no elegant solar arrays, and no visible weaponry. It was a jagged, geometric knife of matte black metal, cold and silent. "It's human," Lyra whispered, her voice dropping into a register of quiet horror as she recognized the architectural signature. The alloy composition. The structural mass ratios. "Chief, this matches the restricted archival profiles from the first contact miscalculations." Vaelen felt a cold drop of fluid slide down his central carapace. 10 millennia ago, during the galaxy's initial catastrophic encounters with the United Earth Coalition, the Council had assumed humanity was a minor, regional nuisance that could be managed through economic isolation and border redlining. The historical records from that era were heavily redacted, but every seasoned cartographer knew the truth. The Council's early diplomatic arrogance hadn't just insulted the young species, it had fundamentally altered their survival doctrine. Humanity hadn't integrated into the galactic community. They had built a wall. A low, vibrating hum resonated through the structural frame of the Ethelgard as the iron monolith initiated a broad-spectrum directional broadcast. It bypassed the ship's ruined firewall completely, projecting a flat, synthesized human voice directly through the bridge's atmospheric speakers. The language was ancient English, translated in real time by the ship's captive core. "You are entering a quiet zone. This sector has been sanitized under the authority of the Terran containment grid. Do not attempt to establish communication. Do not look for our architecture. Do not call out into the dark. We left the starlight to keep the screams inside. Turn back immediately, or your vessel will be integrated into the perimeter defense matrix." The message repeated once, then the monolith went completely dark, its massive gravitational pulse resuming its slow, rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat. Vaelen stared at the crimson text still pulsing on his console. The Council had told them this sector was empty, a dead, resource-rich expanse waiting to be partitioned by the High Empires. But looking at the brutalist iron cenotaph drifting in the void, Vaelen realized the ancient archives had lied. The sector wasn't empty. It was occupied by a silence that had been intentionally, violently manufactured. The Ethelgard did not turn back. To a Conclave expedition operating under a direct, high-level mandate from the Pinnacle Council, an ancient automated warning was not a barrier, it was an invitation. The High Empires were starving for raw materials, and a 3,000 light-year void of unmapped systems represented untold wealth. Chief Science Officer Vaelen authorized a deep-layer system purge, forcing the ship's crystalline core to bypass the human-engineered lockouts. With a grinding shudder from the auxiliary thrusters, the exploration vessel pushed past the iron monolith and descended into the true dark of Sector 12. 3 light weeks into the interior, they found the Kaelan system. Initializing long-range planetary scans, Navigator Lyra murmured, her manipulators flying across the reset consoles. Chief, the primary star is stable, but the planetary readouts, they aren't making sense. The third planet from the Sun, the gravity signature is completely hollow. Vaelen adjusted his visual lenses to the highest magnification. On the forward viewport, the planet grew from a speck of dust into a massive, jagged sphere. It was a world stripped of its crust. Humanity hadn't merely mined the planet, they had systematically dismantled it. The surface was a terrifying, interlocking network of brutalist iron girders, continent-sized structural ribs, and cavernous, hollow bays that plunged straight down into the world's cold, dead iron core. It looked less like a planet and more like an abandoned, planetary-scale drydock, its internal atmosphere long since bled into the vacuum. "Look at the orbital tracks," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "There is debris. Millions of tons of it." Drifting in the Lagrange points of the hollowed-out world were the drifting, frozen corpses of a ghost fleet. Valen's consoles identified the hull signatures instantly. They belonged to the Zelnath swarm, a highly aggressive, hyper-predatory silicon-based species that historical Conclave records claimed had mysteriously migrated out of the galaxy 10,000 years ago. The records were wrong. They hadn't migrated. They had been culled. The Zelnath warships were massive, organic-looking dreadnoughts grown from hyperdense crystalline matrices, designed to ram through standard energy shields. Yet here they floated, shattered like cheap glass. There were no signs of thermal melting, no elegant plasma scoring, and no radiation signatures from standard particle beams. Instead, the hulls were torn open by massive, jagged, ragged entry wounds. The metal ribs of the human-built planetary drydocks were lined with heavy, mechanical railgun silos, artillery pieces the size of mountain ranges that fired unguided, solid tungsten slugs using raw kinetic force. "The humans didn't fight a glorious war here," Vaelen muttered, his carapace tightening as he analyzed the telemetry. "They didn't try to negotiate. They converted an entire solar system into a mechanical slaughterhouse. They hollowed out the planets just to feed the ore into their munitions factories." He looked back at the restricted files from first contact miscalculations. The puzzle pieces were finally locking into a horrific pattern. When the Conclave had first tried to push humanity into a tight, diplomatic corner 10 millennia ago, the human response hadn't been to retreat. It had been to calculate the absolute threat potential of the galaxy, isolate the most dangerous sector, and entirely eliminate anything that could challenge their security, leaving a permanent, silent buffer zone between Earth and the High Empires. "Chief," Lyra suddenly gasped, her antenna snapping backward against her skull. "The background radiation, it's shifting. The monolith at the border, it just sent a high-frequency gravitational pulse down the transit line. It's chaining into the railgun silos on the planet below us." Vaelen looked at the tactical display. The dead, mechanical world below them was waking up. A low, dull amber light began to glow from the depths of the hollowed-out crust, and the ship's engines began to lose power once again. The cage was closing. The automated lattice did not flash with tactical lights. It did not sound an alarm. The defense network of the Kaelan system woke up with the cold, unfeeling efficiency of an industrial meat grinder resuming its shift. Across the hollowed-out carcass of the planet below, kilometer-wide mountain ranges of iron and tungsten began to shift. Massive, mechanical gantry arms, rusted by 10 millennia of exposure to solar winds, groaned as they tracked the Ethelgard's position. Power levels dropping across all main systems. Navigator Lyra cried out, her voice rising in panic. "The localized gravity field is intensifying. Chief, the planet isn't pulling us down, it's locking us into a fixed orbital track. Our warp cells are completely unresponsive." The Ethelgard was trapped in a hyperdense interdictive net, dragged along like a fly caught in web silk. Vaelen watched his tactical display as the automated beacons they had passed over the last 3 weeks began to link their signals. A wave of microgravitational distortion rolled through the system, compressing space itself. The vacuum around the ship began to warp, distorting the distant starlight into weird, jagged lines. Then the true nature of the ghost fleet became clear. As the gravity fields shifted, the drifting, shattered remains of the Zelnath dreadnoughts were violently pulled into motion. They weren't being revived. They were being used as debris shield material. The ancient human defense network was methodically dragging the frozen alien hulls into a tight, swirling vortex of jagged crystal and scrap metal, creating a spinning kinetic barrier that completely walled off the system's exit vectors. "They aren't just trying to destroy us," Vaelen said, his raspy click turning hollow as he watched the telemetry. "They are recycling. They are using the corpses of the last invasion to build a wall around the current one." The Ethelgard's structural sensors began to scream as the atmospheric pressure on the bridge spiked. The human network had activated broad-spectrum microwave emitters from the planet's core, not focused into a weapon beam, but flooded into the entire orbital grid. The temperature outside the hull began to rise by 20 degrees every second. "Chief, we need to transmit our logs back to the Council border," Lyra screamed, her manipulators shaking as she tried to force a signal through the cascading static. "If we don't send the data now, the Conclave will never know what happened to us. They'll just think we vanished like the others." Vaelen looked at the main view screen. A massive railgun silo on the planet's dark side had finished its alignment. The solid tungsten slug resting inside the chamber was the size of a Conclave frigate. It carried no explosive payload, no smart guidance tech. It didn't need it. At 5% the speed of light, raw mass is a god. "We can't transmit, Lyra," Vaelen whispered, his ocular lenses dilating as he watched the ancient iron barrel glow with inductive energy. "The humans didn't leave a loophole in their network. They don't want an apology and they don't want a warning sent back. They built this place to be a graveyard, and graveyards don't have communication lines." The inductive whine of the orbital railgun silos did not travel through the vacuum. Instead, it manifested as a deep, terrifying vibration that rattled the structural frame of the Ethelgard, passing through the floor plates and straight into the crew's bones. The spinning vortex of shattered Zelnath hulls grew tighter, blotting out the remaining distant stars until the ship was completely surrounded by a shifting wall of frozen alien graves. "Structural integrity at 40%. Navigator Lyra screamed, her antenna flattening entirely against her skull. "The external microwave field is boiling our cooling arrays. Chief, the ship's internal temperature is crossing 45 degrees. Our life support is suffocating." The Ethelgard was dying, not from a spectacular military engagement, but from the cold, industrial automation of a cleaning cycle that was 10,000 years old. Inside the archival records room, the secondary comms console suddenly flickered, its digital interface fracturing as it struggled to maintain a stable broad-spectrum link with the Conclave's outer monitoring outposts. To all active strategic nodes and lorekeepers tracking this log across the galactic frontier, Vaelen spoke directly into the emergency archival feed, his voice crackling with dry, desperate static. "This is the final transmission of the Ethelgard. The Council told us Sector 12 was a barren void, a resource pool waiting to be claimed. They lied. The errors of our ancestors during First Contact miscalculations didn't just push humanity into isolation. It forced them to build an automated, planetary-scale slaughterhouse to sanitize everything that crosses their borders. For those of you who have analyzed the ledger from the very beginning, the pieces are finally bare. Jump into the comments ledger below this transmission and lock in your conclusions. Did humanity build this quiet zone to protect the galaxy from what they found here, or did they build it to hide what they became? Keep our mapping signal burning by hitting that like button, and subscribe to ensure our exploration logs are never completely erased by the Council's censors. Let the frontier know the truth before the transmission drops. As his voice cut through the subspace frequencies, the ship's long-range comms array picked up a new, unexpected anomaly. It wasn't a tactical transmission or a military command. It was a sound originating from the deepest, blackest core of Sector 12, a low, rhythmic, synthesized howling that had been looping through the dead vacuum for 10 millennia. It sounded like an artificial gale, a mechanical scream that rose and fell with a terrifying, calculated cadence. The crew of the Ethelgard listened in stunned, suffocating silence as the ship's translation matrix slowly parsed the ancient Terran frequency, converting the howling into a single, repeating, translated phrase. "The leash is off. The cage is locked. Sleep well, Galaxy. We are still awake." Through the forward viewpoint, the mountain-sized railgun barrel on the planet below finished its cycling. The amber lights tracking the Ethelgard turned a solid, permanent, unforgiving red. The bridge of the Ethelgard grew entirely dark as the ship's auxiliary backup cells failed. The only illumination left came from the deep, pulsing amber glow of the automated human planet below and the stark red firing indicators of the looming railgun silos. The mechanical howling on the comms channel suddenly cut to absolute silence. There was no sound when the mountain-sized artillery piece fired. A single, solid tungsten slug, 5 million tons of unyielding kinetic mass, tore out of the planet's magnetic tracks at a significant fraction of light speed. It didn't strike the Ethelgard directly. It didn't need to. As the slug zipped past the exploration vessel's port side, the immense gravitational wake and vacuum displacement of its velocity grabbed the ship like a leaf in a hurricane. The Ethelgard's structural bulkheads buckled, the internal titanium alloy ribs snapping with loud, metallic reports that echoed through the dying decks. The ship was violently dragged into the swirling debris wall of the ancient Zelnath Ghost Fleet, its pristine hull instantly shredded by thousands of tons of frozen crystalline scrap metal. Chief Science Officer Vaelen sat in his buckling command chair, his carapace cracked, watching his primary data slate bleed its final drops of power. Navigator Lyra. Vaelen croaked, his visual lenses failing. Is the emergency capsule away? There was no answer. Lyra's console had completely collapsed into a smoking heap of melted wiring. The bridge was venting atmosphere, a high-pitched, desperate hiss that grew quieter by the second as the air escaped into the void. Vaelen pulled the emergency recording module from his neck collar with a trembling manipulator. He manually jammed it into the vessel's single-hardened, nuclear-shielded black box transmitter, a device designed to survive a planetary impact and float indefinitely in the dark. To the high arbiters of the Pinnacle Council, Vaelen spoke, his voice fading into a quiet, dying whisper against the rushing air. If this recording ever drifts across the perimeter border, do not send a rescue fleet. Do not send an armada to avenge us. The humans did not leave this sector dark because they were hiding. They left it dark because it is a permanent quarantine zone. He looked through the fractured view screen one last time. Below them, the continent-sized mechanical structures of the hollow world were already retracting back into the iron crust. The red firing lights were turning off, transitioning smoothly back to a low, passive, rhythmic baseline. The automation cycle was complete. The intruder had been neutralized. The sector was clean. They aren't monsters, Vaelen whispered as the frost began to form over his ocular lenses, sealing his vision in white. They're the caretakers. And we just broke their silence. The Ethelgard fractured into 3 distinct, silent pieces, its remaining fuel cells blooming into a brief, microscopic flash of light that was immediately swallowed by the absolute ink of Sector 12. The spinning vortex of ancient alien debris slowly settled back into its permanent, calculated Lagrange points. The massive iron monolith at the system's threshold resumed its slow, microgravitational pulse, blinking its mechanical eye into the empty dark, counting the stars, and waiting for the next empire arrogant enough to knock on the door.